Today on Spotlight Now, we continue on in our conversation on rediscovering Hawaii So.
We're talking about how that effort is helping to rebuild Lahaina. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. We are going to begin our conversation on rediscovering Hawaii So, and always want to encourage all of you who are tuning in to engage in the conversation. You can head over to Facebook and to your questions and comments throughout our discussion.
As you know, if you've been watching this program for some time, Hawaii Executive Collaborative is a sponsor of this program, and from time to time we talk about their efforts with rediscovering Hawaii Soul. It's an initiative stood up by HEC to get back to Hawaiian values and to bring island consciousness to some of the biggest decisions facing our community. To talk about this more in depth today, we've welcomed in Shelly Kimura from Hawaiian Electric. We are so glad to have you, Shelly. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Mahalo for having me.
So tell us a little bit about how you came to RHS. This is an initiative that's now almost 3 years in the making. How did you first get involved?
I first got involved back, I think it was in the fall of 2022. They had just started. They had gone through one retreat, and I was invited to join. I didn't really know what I was joining, and I'm sure you've heard this before. A lot of people were asked to join. We didn't really know what we were getting into because it wasn't completely defined yet, and I think maybe that was one of the beautiful things about it. It was an open book, an open container, and we needed to fill it. And the way it was explained to me was that they were bringing together business leaders and Native Hawaiian leaders, recognizing the importance of bringing those communities closer together because that was so important to the future of Hawaii. And with that, I joined in the first retreat, and it was actually a very profound gathering, I thought, and saw a lot of relationships being built, trust being built, a lot of vulnerability in people saying, well, I don't understand this, or this has really hurt me, and people being open to hearing and understanding and seeing different perspectives, which was, I think, a really beautiful thing.
Talk about maybe when you first were introduced and just the gathering that occurred when you have all these high-level CEOs, people who are very engaged in the community, and then you have these community leaders. Mm-hmm. Not often do we see that that coming together of these two different groups of people. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like, and what did maybe you learn from some of the relationships that you have with some of these other CEOs and then other community leaders who maybe you weren't necessarily engaging with as often as it was before this opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So, you know, it was really interesting for me to enter into this space because at that time I was a brand new CEO, and I was joining the room with other CEOs that I had looked up to for, you know, many, many years as I was growing up in my career. And I also grew up dancing hula from the time I was very, very young. And so there were all these kumuhulas in the room and Native Hawaiian leaders that I admired as well. And so we had, from where I was sitting, you had all these iconic leaders, but in two completely different worlds that I always struggled to figure out how they came together in my own life. When I started my career, I didn't know how my hula upbringing fit into my corporate life, my business life. And I felt like I sort of had to put it on the shelf for a little while when I was at work because I didn't know how it integrated. And then as I grew up in my career and, you know, had more responsibility, had more control over the things I did, I started bringing that in more and more into the values that I had and into, you know, how I was making decisions and those type of things, but still not fully knowing how it would all come together. Seeing how those two groups came together and how the conversations evolved and how I felt like I had a foot in each side was actually very liberating for me. to be able to start to see even more how all of this can be integrated together, and how powerful Native Hawaiian values and indigenous wisdom and knowledge can be integrated with the business world and the assets and the resources and the decisions that need to be made in Hawaii for Hawaii. And what we all had in common was that we were all there because we love Hawaii so much, and that everyone was committed to that, and that's what we had in common. And we were trying to figure out how we protect the things we love about Hawaii. And we talked about different scenarios, which is one of the methodologies they use to allow these conversations to happen. And one of the scenarios talks about, well, if we don't do anything and we keep going down this path, where do we end up? And we all realize that's not a place that we want to be. That if we love Hawaii for, Hawaii means different things to a lot of different people, but if I were to just sum it up very simply, it would be about the spirit of aloha. And that also means different things to different people, but it's about the love for our land, for the ocean, for each other, for our communities, for generations past, present, and future, and recognizing that that's all one, and seeing that as a more holistic thing, and that we're all a part of that. So if we all agree that we're a part of that, then how do we all collectively participate and contribute to make that better? And I think that's what, in the essence of rediscovering Hawaii Soul, that's what we're all trying to do. It's not that we have all the answers, but the fact that we can come together and that's what we're trying to figure out, that actually is powerful all by itself.
I mean, it's really interesting from where you come from, because you do have a foot in both worlds, right? Because if you've been dancing for as long as you have access to those values and to that wisdom, and in some sense to the people in that room. And then, of course, in your role as a CEO, you have access to the other side. But I'm sure, and in our conversations with this series, we've talked to some folks who were kind of afraid, to enter and to use Hawaiian language, to feel like maybe they were, that there was some cultural appropriation, or it wasn't appropriate for them to use language in that way. Mm-hmm. And you see a real invitation happening from both sides of that coin, from the Bishop Street side, saying, no, please come into the boardroom. We welcome you in this space. I'm curious to see from that first meeting, and now we're several years out, what kind of shifts you've seen in those relationships, and what you think some of the outcomes that you're starting to see happen because of that.
What I saw happen in that room, and what I continue to see, is that you have business leaders who really appreciate and value the perspectives of our Native Hawaiian and other community leaders, nonprofit community leaders. Not that they didn't value them before, because I think they really did, but there's a much deeper appreciation for it, and a much better perspective, even for myself, on where that fits into the work that we are all doing. And as businesses, what role do we have in this collective society of Hawaii to achieve this broader vision that we have for Hawaii?
Let's talk a little bit about how this has impacted your organization and your company at HICO. What can you tell us about how this movement of rediscovering Hawaii's soul has maybe influenced HICO and some of the things that you are now implementing within your own work environment?
So, even before rediscovering Hawaii Soul, we were reestablishing what we stood for and what our role was in Hawaii. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was, one of the most important things we can do is, given the size of Hawaiian Electric, given the resources that we have and the assets we have and the access to networks and capital, how do we help build a better future for Hawaii, a more sustainable future for Hawaii, for our children and our grandchildren? And how do we do that in a way that is right for our employees, for our communities, for our economy, And that became part of our mission to carry out our core responsibilities of safe, reliable, clean energy, but integrating it with that bigger picture of how do we fit in with our Hawaii community. And also recognizing that what we do in Hawaii, and if we can create a sustainable, thriving economy in Hawaii, then that can be an example to people elsewhere.
Where do you think we are in this process? I know that you've been involved pretty early on, and Kamana'o Crab has been on here. He's the executive lead for Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, and he says it's a very long journey to be focused in the moment and not necessarily at the end. But when you look at the arc of this process, where do you think we are in this?
I agree. It's a long journey, but I think there's been so much progress in such a short amount of time. So that one retreat I talked about is maybe 40 or 50 people at that time, and they've actually expanded this to reach over 600 people at this point. And I think it's so much bigger than just that. You take every individual who's now been exposed to this, and all the people who aren't participating in Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, but have those kinds of values and perspectives, it strengthens and reinforces each other when more and more people have that same value set and that same framework. So I think Rediscovering Hawaii Soul creates a framework and a platform where people can come together, whereas previously everyone was kind of doing this on their own with their own maybe the same values and the same perspectives, but doing it separately. This creates an opportunity for people to say, hey, there's so many more people and organizations that share these values and this perspective that we can start to work together even more, and we can have these conversations. And I know that person now, and I trust that person, and maybe we haven't approached things in the same way in the past, but I know where they're coming from, I know where their heart is, and if we just talk, we'll be able to figure something out together. Maybe it won't be tomorrow, but we're gonna work at it and we're gonna figure it out. And I think that's actually that kind of resolve and that belief that can happen is the seed for the work, because it takes hard work for the work to continue to figure out how to solve these problems and challenges we have.
Well, one of the things that RHS has been involved in, and when you talk about the importance of some of these aspects that you brought up that are being really ingrained into all those who are a part of this movement of Rediscovering Hawaii, so is that keying in on relationships and rebuilding and building that trust between two communities. As Hiko looks to continue on and helping in the rebuilding of Lahaina and repairing relationships with businesses and individuals, how would you say the framework of RHS has helped in this effort with the Lahaina community and all that Hiko is doing and involved in right now?
Yeah, really good question. Thank you for that. From the very beginning, we obviously have many employees on Maui. We have employees who lost their homes in Lahaina. We have employees who lost family members in Lahaina. And we were and are committed to make sure we're a part of helping to get that community back on its feet. And from the very beginning, we were trying to make sure we were in the community, building relationships with those that were emerging as leaders in the community, so that we could understand what was needed, where they were at, and how we could fit in, and how we could help empower them and support them. And so that started very early on. Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, they created an opportunity, just like that first retreat I went to, they created an opportunity for business leaders and other leaders, even political leaders, to come together with leaders in the Lahaina community. And it was about a dozen leaders in the Lahaina community, one of which you're gonna meet later today, Nestor. And I met him at that time as well. And when we got to that retreat, I think there was a lot of hesitation from many, including those in the Lahaina community. And I would say at that time, I knew about maybe a third of them, because we had already had, you know, quite good relationships by that time. But I knew some of them had some trepidation coming into this room of CEOs and political leaders. And I wanted to make sure that they knew that they were the important ones in the room, that we were all there to listen to them, to learn from them, because we're all trying to figure out how to help rebuild Lahaina in the way that was pono. And through those few days, we all got to know each other better, and we all learned so much from the Lahaina community members. And you know, when you talk about Hawaii Soul, the kind of things that happen, this is typical Hawaii story, right? But some of the Lahaina community members, I found out it was my hula sister's auntie and my hula sister's cousin. And so, you know, it was great to connect at that level. And another community member we had met when I brought some of my board members into Lahaina to appreciate what was happening. And we had a really candid conversation when that happened, but he also was there and we were able to connect again. And then through that gathering, I then followed up and met with some of those community members again in Lahaina to make sure that the trust that was built, we could continue to maintain that. Just going back right to where I started, because I really believe that's where it starts, to start rebuilding and to start healing.
Yeah, and I would imagine that those conversations, you know, you think about those couple of days together, they're not always easy, right? That some of that is, it's like a family, like some of it is confrontational and people have different opinions.
Absolutely.
When you go through that kind of a process, tell us a little bit about, you know, building that trust, because it's not just, you don't get to aloha right away, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one example is, so, I mean, obviously, given who I am and what company I belong to, there were some in the Lahaina community that were very concerned about undergrounding of lines, and that was the most important thing that they wanted to talk about. And they were concerned that that wasn't happening right away. And so we actually had a group to talk about that. We created a group to talk about that and talk about what it would take and how can we get there at some point. But also talking about having a shared understanding of what some of the barriers would be. So I think through those conversations and being open enough to have those candid conversations, you leave with a better appreciation from both sides, or all sides, I would say. I don't want to make it sound like it's in opposition, but just from all sides to understand the situation so that we can start talking about, well, what would be the path to get to that outcome that folks are looking for.
Through this process and as you experienced you know, some of the things that you've described and all those leaders that were part of that meeting and that interaction that happened, did you feel like there was a coming together? Because oftentimes, as Yanji described, there is obviously some moments of confrontation and there may be some disagreement. But how would you describe things now, just the working relationship, and how has ARGIS maybe helped in that, in helping to reframe the way in which leaders are now looking at this problem, say, before any of this maybe happened and maybe before ARGIS even existed? Has this helped through this process of a tragedy like this?
I think it really has helped. It's taken longer, I think, than anybody wants. It's never going to be fast enough, right? And there's so many different entities that need to be involved to create the future for Lahaina. And I think everybody is saying that the community, it should start with the community and what the community wants, and that's a good thing. I think that all the leaders involved in the conversation, from where I sit, can pick up the phone and call each other and say, hey, where are you on this? Or can I help you with that? I think that's a positive thing. As an example, you know, a month ago, there was a community leader in Lahaina who was having a retreat to talk about how they can help provide input into the rebuild of Lahaina, making sure all the cultural aspects, all the cultural sites and the EV and the potential for this cultural corridor can be weaved into the rebuild of Lahaina. And they invited me to join this group of 40 people. That would have never happened probably without that retreat that we had, where we could connect at that level, on a very personal level, and get to know each other.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because I think we've had folks from the military on here meeting in conjunction with Native Hawaiian leaders, and those are relationships that you just would not expect to see. And then of course we've talked about climate, we've talked about tourism, and people from very different entities, or what you would think. And I like that you said all sides as opposed to two sides, because there's such a varying degree of difference on these issues. But these are tough issues. I wonder what you think the application of this kind of work. I mean, it really seems like it can work in a bunch of different areas in the challenges facing Hawaii. Absolutely.
You brought up the military and Department of Defense, and so we had a different retreat for that. And it sounds like all I do is go to retreats, but those are the two that I went to, the three that I went to. So the original, the Lahaina one, and then the military one. And the people that are organizing Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, they kind of handpick who they think are the right people for that particular conversation, depending on what your role is or what's happening. And so for Hawaiian Electric, the Department of Defense is our largest customer across 5 islands. And we all know there's a significant concentration of military in Hawaii. And we know that there's often a complicated and strained relationship between local people, the Native Hawaiian community, and the military. And so, especially with Red Hill, that just adds to it. So the Rediscovering Hawaii Soul leadership thought that there could be a role to apply what we've done in other places to this relationship with the military. And so we went through the same 3-day kind of retreat again. I thought it was really productive, where people saw each other as people saw where people's hearts were really. I think that's the thing that comes out in these retreats. Everyone sees where the other's hearts are, and maybe the actions are interpreted differently because you just make assumptions on what is happening. But when you understand what's behind it, there's much more empathy and appreciation. And so then you get to, well, maybe that action wasn't the best action if you understand this part of the story. And so let's find a different path forward. And one of the things that came out of that retreat, which I thought was really amazing, was that the Department of Defense, leaders in the Department of Defense recognized that, hey, in this context, part of our mission is protecting Hawaii's soul. Like, we're here to protect the United States and our national security interests, and Hawaii is really critical to that. And part of what we do is we need to protect Hawaii's soul as well. And so there was a memorandum of understanding that came out of that, and was signed a few months ago by top-level DC Department of Defense representatives.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, you just would not expect to ever happen.
Right.
As we wrap up our conversation with you this afternoon, I'm wondering, when you look at the future of this movement of Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, and the future of the different issues that leaders within our community look to tackle, what would you say is your hope for your organization, your company, with integrating maybe some of the things that you're learning, and also just the community at whole? How do we measure the metrics of success with this movement moving forward?
I mean, my hope is that the work that we are all doing here creates an example for what we can do more broadly. I believe that in Hawaii, we innately understand what it means to live on an island, just because we all do. But you quickly understand how everything is interconnected because of that. So as a person, you understand that. But as a CEO, you begin to understand how that applies to a company and an institution or an organization. And how do you then contribute in a way to Hawaii and our economy and our future and our communities that works with everybody else, so we're all creating this sustainable future for Hawaii and thriving future for Hawaii that others can use as an example. And my belief is it's all based on that more holistic understanding of how we each operate in a system, and not just you on your own in your own lane.
Yeah, island consciousness, I think, is how I've heard it described. Yeah.
Exactly.
Charlie Kimura, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. We are going to continue our conversation about rediscovering Hawaii soul with some folks from Lahaina and Central Pacific Bank. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello and welcome back to this special edition of Spotlight Now as we continue on in our conversation of rediscovering Hawaii soul.
And we're joined now by two guests, Catherine No, the former president and CEO of Central Pacific Bank, now the head of CPB's foundation, and Nestor Ugale of the Lahaina Advisory Team. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Catherine, you've been on before to talk about RHS in a different context, but now you're really centering in on your work with Lahaina and your relationship with Nestor, and I want to hear all about that. But tell us a little bit, kind of building off of what Shelley was talking about. When you think about and explain RHS to people, how do you frame the work that's happening?
Well, rediscovering Hawaii soul has had such an impact on my own personal life. But when I think about the initiative, it's about building relationships and building trust. And I believe we talked earlier on another show about relationships with the Native Hawaiian community and how the work that we're doing there started with listening and understanding, building trust, and then the conversations could happen about what we can do together to build a stronger community. In the same way that Nestor and I came together in building that relationship, trust, to do some great things, really my supporting you, Nestor, on some great work you're doing in Lahaina for the Filipino community.
Yeah, and Nestor, tell us a little bit about how you came to this work, rediscovering Hawaii
Right.
Soul. Were you at one of these convenings, or how did you enter into a relationship now with Catherine and all the work you're doing with RHS?
I'm trying to keep it short. This whole thing really fell onto the laps of the people of Maui, of Lahaina. I don't think this was something that I aspired to do or aspired to be a part of. But it was, I guess, a calling by the community and really the invitation from the RHS team. I had a lot of reservations. I was one of those people Shelley was talking about previously about what is this, kind of what's the purpose of it and what's really to come from it. Because I think my vision at that point was 3 months out of the fire and watching a community struggle and kind of figure itself out, its footing, right? And so being invited to a conference that we had, one of the many conferences that Shelley attends, that was where we met. And I think the work that was done there was essential in where we are today. So I think maybe that speaks to the path, really. It's not what I do as a day job, but it's something where I'm happy to pour my energy and heart into for the community.
And before we kind of get more into that interaction, I want to just provide our viewers with a little more context
Sure.
of what you experienced during this time in this rebuilding process. Tell us a little bit about your connection, obviously, to this community and how things have changed for you since what transpired in your community.
Sure. So I am of Lahaina. Grew up in the town. Went to school at Sacred Hearts and Kapalua preschool, and then went all the way through Lahaina Luna. So I'm one of the many that are part of that entire legacy of Lahaina, and so that's my connection to the place. I work there now. I don't currently reside. I'm one of the lucky few who didn't lose a home, but I lost my town, and watching the rest of my family kind of pick up the pieces for many who have lost. Sorry, there's so many things going on in my mind right now about how many, just the devastation that happened, but my connection to the place is that. I guess you could say my involvement kind of came from that being in that peripheral. A lot of people who did lose and lost everything didn't have the capacity to advocate for themselves, and so that's kind of where I fell into that spot.
And let's stay with you for a second. If you could tell folks who aren't familiar, what is the Lahaina Advisory Team and what is your role there?
Yeah, sure. The Lahaina Advisory was kind of put together by the mayor, Mayor Rick Bisson, and I was kind of a late addition. There was no, fanfare to it. I kind of came on as an additional voice to advocate additional voice, give additional voice and volume to a really large demographic of Lahaina. In Hawaii in general, but in Lahaina where we make up a huge portion of residents, nearly 40%, if you want to count those who claim other, ethnicities also. And so I think there was some value added in there, and then and just in that basic work we were already trying to do, or I was already part of a movement to create a nonprofit to do that advocacy work. And so it kind of all fell into place because when I met Catherine, it was just an idea. Rediscovering Hawaii Soul, they didn't know that part about me or what I was trying to do. They just knew that I was out there doing something. And so putting all the pieces together was essential.
And Catherine, maybe if you can share a little context into how you folks came together, the connection that you have, because as he speaks about the Filipino community, this is a community that also you are very engaged in during your time at Central Pacific Bank and continuing on as the foundation's president. But how did things come together, and how did you find this common ground?
Sure. First, I'll share that my parents emigrated to the United States from the Philippines, and so as a kid, I spent my summers in the Philippines. So I have a real aloha for the Filipinos. At this retreat that Nestor was speaking about, there was the opportunity for a paired walk, and you were a Filipino leader that I knew about. I knew that you were doing a lot in Lahaina, and I just wanted a chance to meet Nestor and see if there was some way that I could support, but first trying to understand what the needs are in the Filipino community. And I just remember, so you were just saying you had this idea in your head, and it really, they were big ideas. So they were ideas about the recovery, so in the short term, things that were necessary, but then there were the bigger ideas, the longer term, and how we might help the Filipinos in the longer term. And so I was drawn to the work that he was doing, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about some of the things we've done since then. But this is a real leader in the community that deserved my support, I believed.
Yeah, Nestor, let's build on that.
Sure.
And for folks who aren't familiar, we've talked about the paired walk concept before, but this is an opportunity within these workshops that Rediscovering Hawaii Soul has, where you get to take a literal walk with someone that you might not be familiar with, but you feel drawn to connection. And it's interesting, Catherine, because this is the second paired walk that has had a big, you know, your first one was with Auntie Mapuana de Silva, and I know now you two are fast friends and very close, and she's done a lot of work with the bank and vice versa, and really some interesting work that's come out of that. And then again, another walk and another really interesting outcome. So Catherine approaches you, you start to tell her your ideas, and, and then what happens after that?
Yeah, they were far-fetched for sure. You know, our idea at the time between a select group of friends and we started this group, we had no real formal gathering name or anything, but we knew that we wanted to stand up a resource center, something that was for the Filipino people of Lahaina to celebrate their history and their contributions to the society of Hawaii, right? And not just for ourselves, but to really connect ourselves to the whole place. A really long-term vision, something that we never seen before, but we felt that the fires exposed that. You know, you can take away all the buildings, and what's left are the people, you know, or who's still there anyway. And with that comes our identity. And that just became so open for everyone to see. And so expressing that to somebody like Catherine, I had no idea what it would turn into or what it could be. But I just felt, hey, I'm here. I might as well just share this broad vision of creating, you know, a longer vision of Filipinos making their presence here and being a part of the community in general.
And Catherine, maybe if you can expand upon that, about just the collaboration and these opening conversations that happened, and what you saw as some of the reasons why you wanted to get involved and where things stand right now.
Sure. Well, it started with, maybe I could call it more of an advisory kind of role, and brainstorming on possibilities with this big vision that Nestor had. And at the outset, and so maybe this is from the banking background that I have, some of the discussion was about you know, getting a solid financial footing. And so in that way, with that solid financial footing, Nestor could then focus on the vision and doing the great things that he wanted to do. And so I think our foundation was able to support you in a small way to bridge you to the more significant funding, and that amount was used to launch a website to just bring visibility to the work that the nonprofit was doing. And now we are brainstorming on yet another idea. I don't know if I should be the one to share the idea, or this is really your
color.
idea,
No.
but it's a it's a night market. I'm going to let you share more, but the concept behind this, it's not like a farmer's market. It's really that and more. So there's the opportunity for small businesses to sell their goods and food and other items, but it's a chance for the community to come together, and also a place where they can get resources and help. And so I'm excited to share that we will be collaborating on the next night market. I'm hoping that it's going to be in the parking lot of our Lahaina branch, Central Pacific Bank's Lahaina branch, and Lahaina Gateway. And we have our branch manager, Rose Koyama, there of Filipino ancestry, who's excited about getting involved and supporting. And one thing I'm particularly excited about is just the opportunity for small businesses to profile their goods. And I don't know, maybe you can share the story about the last one and just how it is so life-changing for some of these business owners.
Sure. So Kaibigan ng Lahaina is the name of the nonprofit. That's something we got to practice even saying. But we put on this event. It was a Palenque night, so it was a night market, a Filipino night market. Filipino people tend to culturally not seek the help unless, unless it was culturally sensitive towards who they are and what it was. So our first gathering we thought it was going to be small, brought in 1,000 people, and we ended up feeding probably about 5,000. I want to say 5,000, could be wrong. Pounds of fresh produce to the people who needed it. But more importantly, we asked businesses, Filipino-owned businesses who lost their business, to come back and feature their food, essentially, or products. And it was a smash. I mean, most of them sold out that night. So that was the economic revitalization that she's talking about, is what we're interested about in perpetuating and looking for in the long term also.
You know, what's so interesting about this, and I hear echoes of what Shelley was talking about, people coming together and really showing where their heart is and trying to figure out that alignment. And I think about, in the context of your nonprofit, you have a big idea. If you were to cold call, the former president and CEO of CPB, I'm not sure that Catherine, you're a very busy lady, I don't know if you would take his call, right? But if you meet in the context of this RHS setting, clearly through that relationship, big things are able to happen.
Yeah.
Tell us about the power of that kind of convening.
Absolutely. I was listening to Shelley talk about it, and I put myself in that room. I couldn't but stare out the window and kind of relive some of those feelings. I came in with those reservations. I came in with that feeling of distrust. All these powerful CEOs and presidents of all these companies, what do you want with the small town of Lahaina who just lost everything? And what can you really do for us? Because up until that point, from my vision, we were doing everything for ourselves. And here, federal, state, all these things come in. But to see the private sector activated this way was refreshing. I think we talk about pilina. We talk about, building that pilina. And I think of the pili grass itself and how, you have to go through these twists and turns and drying out and doing all those things. But when you add that essential water to it, and then it kind of just starts forming itself and planting itself in the ground. That's what this was. Two pieces of grass that never really knew each other, but then when you add the right stuff to it, something amazing can come from it, something that's resilient, that can withstand fires even, right? And I think that's where the RHS movement can go, I think, in an organic way, which is what I'm excited for, hopefully, in the coming years.
And Catherine, from your side, as someone who, as Shelley said, going into this meeting with the community of Lahaina, understanding where they might be, some of the frustrations and just some of the reservations that they had, from your perspective and your personal side, what was it like for you entering that world and the motivation to want to be involved?
I walked into that convening really wanting to learn, really wanting to understand where the issues were. And I mentioned earlier about my connection to the Filipinos, and just I think of it as a very joyous group that's knows how to celebrate. But yet I knew the pain that the Filipino community was feeling. And so when I walked into that convening, it was with an open mind to try to understand better what the issues are, and then where I can help. And I was really happy, just really happy to have met Nestor and to have the chance to partner with him. And I, like you said, I think this is the beginning of just some great work together ahead of us.
Yeah, Nestor, tell us a little bit about sort of broadening out. We've had more than a year now since the fires. When you think about how your community is doing right now, what would you like people to know?
It's heavy. It's hard not to get super emotional about it. I think a year out, I've always thought of and try to foresee the waves of change that Lahaina would see over time. A year ago you would hope that it's totally different. I mean, if you drive through Lahaina town, 25% of permits that were issued or so of homes are popping up again. So there's some glimmer of hope there, but that's not the whole picture. And unfortunately, a lot of the Filipino community that we're intaking and dealing with are still at, if not the same or worse of a position. And I know that's not what everyone wants to hear. We want to be hopeful and think that things are happening in rapid speed, in rapid sense. But when food insecurity and financial insecurity is still at the forefront of everything, I mean, you're talking about losing a huge part of your workforce and of Lahaina, essentially. So I think, not to be dreary about it, that's what everyone says is, I just want to make sure that we point that out, that it's not easy. Majority of our population were the renters that lost the homes that they were in. So, and if they're long-term renters, they're losing out on a great deal, right? On a rent they were maybe grandfathered in, and then to come out of it into the general market that it is today is going to be extremely tough. Yeah. So I think our community is a place where we're trying to be resilient, we're trying to be hopeful, keep our families intact, but it's going to take a lot of grit, right? And sticking together, really.
Well, I think you also highlights something that I've heard from other people. Another CEO, a local business on Maui, Maui Chili Oil, Kit Furio,
Yeah,
who
Kit.
is involved in the community. And one of the things that she said was that came out of this and through the days and months after. You really got to see the difference between the different communities. It was almost highlighted even more because for many, English is a second language.
Absolutely.
And not understanding the process of FEMA, what you had to go through, all these things that many in the community felt lost at
Yep.
times. If you can shed light from your personal experience about that, I mean, because I don't think that a lot of us really understand some of the additional struggles
Sure.
that a minority community may face in these types of
Right.
tragedies.
Right. It's an interesting community because we want to say minority, but we're almost a majority. So it's a silent majority. It's a marginalized community nonetheless. But Kit Furukawa, she's an amazing person. She helped us also in the same likeness of that Catherine did as far as mentorship. But our community, we rely on, and like other immigrant communities, we rely on the second, third generation to translate everything. And when help has a deadline, and when help has a physical place you need to go to get that help, a lot of times people just shy away. And so we may have reports out there today that say this percentage of Maui people got this kind of help, but it doesn't account for the people who never showed up. And that's kind of why we're here today and what our struggle is, really.
Yeah. Catherine, I want to go back to that convening and also thinking about all the progress that you two have made together on this night market project, on his nonprofit. Thinking about the shifts that have happened, walking into that room, walking out of it, and then this many months later, what are some of the shifts that you've experienced, and what have you witnessed in others?
Yeah. Nestor used the word pilina earlier, and so I'm glad that you mentioned that. So one big shift that I've seen is just the kinds of relationships, the connections, the plina that have been made, and so what I see coming out of that is a lot more trust, where then we can work together to do more things. And it's across a lot of communities. And in fact, over lunch, we were talking about that. So certainly it's the Filipino community in Lahaina. It's the Native Hawaiians. It's others coming together because there are a lot of challenges across Hawaii. And unless we all work together, and unless it's coming from a place of trust of each other, it's really going to be hard to address all these challenges. And you spoke about a lot of them, so it was just daunting to hear you speak, Nestor, now that we have a long way to go, and there's just a lot of hurt still out there that we need to address.
And maybe for you, Nestor, what is your hope moving forward, and how do you think that this partnership and just this new relationship that you formed, but also maybe other CEOs that could also be involved and get activated through meeting through RHS, what is your hope for and vision for things that you would like to do to impact the community?
Sure. The group I work with, I'm blessed because we all kind of see the world in a similar light. The vision that we have today is a long-term vision, right? It's not one that just addresses the unmet needs of food insecurity and things like that. Of course, those are huge problems. But what RHS does and kind of bridges the gap between everything is this question of identity. It brings to light into discussion what it means to be in, from, of Hawaii. Whether you're Koko or you're not, we all play a role here. And I think we as a Filipino community can say, all right, I'm an immigrant, right? I brought adobo with me, right? We can joke around about things like that. But in reality, we come with this sense of aina that is the same as what Hawaiians have. We're the people planting everything in a backyard, similar to other immigrant cultures. We need to bridge the gap between that. What I hope and want to instill in others like Catherine and other CEOs, and I hope that RHS can bridge that gap really and be successful at it, is to organically make this movement come into the conversation that we have at the laundromat. Not just in these, calls that happen during the daytime when people are working, but to see this turn into a real movement of understanding and speaking about identity. I think that's something that I'm real passionate about, that Dwayne spoke about and mentioned, we spoke about it together. But if we don't talk about those hard conversations, I don't think we're going to really have and I'm not trying to be, that soul part of Hawaii that we really appreciate could be gone in another quarter century, right? If we don't talk about what it means to be part Hawaiian or non-Hawaiian, living in Hawaii and wanting to be a part of this place. So I encourage every CEO out there to find a Nestor or another small organization, and really and build that trust and open it up and say, here's my phone number and give me a call if you can.
Yeah, Catherine, building on that, what do you see as the wider application of RHS? We've seen it, we've had conversations with folks here from the military and CNHA coming together talking about land leases and some of the complicated issues there. Of course, we've had conversations about tourism. We're talking today about Lahaina. These are big, complicated issues.
Yes, they're big, complicated issues, and what we need to do to address them are transformational kinds of things. And so what I really appreciate about this RHS movement is this bigger picture thinking about transforming the community. So it's not the little changes, and we've done a good job with little changes over the years, but we have to rethink the future. And again, I come back to it starts with relationships, and it does start with the one-on-one relationships, but then bringing more leaders and then more of the community into the fold. And I like the way you said, Nestor, so that we have people at the laundromat talking about, what is Hawaii's soul and what does that mean and what is our responsibility with carrying Hawaii's soul? What is our responsibility to our community here?
Catherine, I just want to follow up if I can. When you think about, you were, a part of the initial conversations when this movement started and this whole idea, to see how things have evolved now, to see the relationships that you have made through this process and the progress that has been made. If you can share about and reflect back to that first meeting and where things are at now, what has maybe surprised you and what are you encouraged about as you continue to move forward?
That's a good question. So I think back to my first involvement in RHS, and it was 3 years ago at a first convening of leaders. So it was a mix of CEOs, business leaders, community leaders, and even some political leaders. And I remember walking into that first convening, actually intimidated, because we had a number of our Native Hawaiian leaders that had joined the convening, and I knew of them, but I didn't really have the relationships, and I had this trepidation even of talking about Hawaiian values, using Hawaiian words. And so if I fast forward to where we are today, so 3 years later, I would say that first of all, there's absolute comfort in talking about Hawaiian values and why they're important to the future here in our community. But furthermore, I'm excited about the relationships that have been forged, some of the progress. We shared some examples today, but there's real work that's being done that's come from that place of trust, from building those relationships, starting 3 years ago.
Yeah, and Nestor, what is your hope going forward with this movement when you think about, what I hear throughout this conversation with you and with Shelley is that we are all stakeholders, whether we live in Lahaina or not, we are all part of this island community, and so we all have a role and a part to play in the recovery.
I think that you mentioned the word shift earlier, and it really got me thinking about what type of emotional shift everyone has to undergo in order to come to a better place, and I speak of Lahaina itself. Trusting government, trusting any entity that comes in with an intention of rebuilding or reforming something that is yours, that you once knew, is always going to come with a lot of hesitation, right? And I guess I just want to go back to the Pilina part of it. If we don't build that, if we don't all understand that we're all stakeholders in this, and that we can't just sit aside idly and watch somebody else do the work. I guess I'm hopeful because I'm watching other organizations look at what we're doing and see the way we're doing it, and the people who we're connecting with, and them seeing like, oh, you can actually call them and work with them. Yeah, the mayor's not a scary guy. He might be really tall, but other than that, I mean, give him a ukulele, we'll break the ice, you know what I mean? But it's finding trust in government, finding trust in business, and then applying it to our everyday lives and what we do day in, day out. I mean, we just got to make that the norm, as opposed to living in these silos. Again, the fire took away the buildings, and when the buildings went away, we're stuck looking at each other. And I can't not take that vision out of my mind and say, I got to work with you if we're going to rebuild anything, right?
I think that's a wonderful place for us to end our conversation. Thank you both for being here today. Catherine Noah of CPB, and of course Nestor Ugale from Lahaina Advisory Team. When's the next night market?
Summertime, so your families can come.
All right,
Yeah.
we love
Stay
that.
tuned for that.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV
That doesn't look too good.
and send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great conversation on rediscovering Hawaii. So we encourage you to head back to hawaiinewsnow.com to really catch the whole interview and really the thought process behind this movement.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about the organization itself and some of the upcoming events, you can go to hawaiisoul.org. Very interesting to see how these relationships are evolving. Still so much to do in Lahaina, but a lot of hope expressed today. We leave you with this beautiful shot of Hilo Bay. We'll be back next week to talk about tourism.
Master's off. I forgot. All right.
Okay.
Here we go. This is going to be the sunrise.
Okay.
Here we go. 3, 2. Coming up later today on Spotlight Now, we focus in on tourism.
We'll be talking to the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority about the latest from the capital, plus how that agency is giving back. Join us today at 1 o'clock on K5.
All right. The general tease. Here we go. 3, 2. On the next episode of Spotlight Now, we focus in on tourism in Hawaii.
We'll be talking with the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority about the latest from the legislature, plus how that agency is giving back. Join us Tuesday at 1 o'clock on K5.
Okay.
No wrap. That's nice.
Save and close. Save.
You don't need to decide now, but there is going to be one Tuesday in